My family kicked my 7-year-old daughter and me out during Christmas dinner, right in the middle of the meal. There was still warm gravy sitting on my plate, and my fork was frozen in the air like it had completely forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. My daughter Mia, who is only 7 years old, had taken exactly 2 small, polite bites of her dinner roll and was quietly counting the peas on her plate, one by one, the way children do when they can sense that the atmosphere in a room has become sharp, uncomfortable, and dangerous, even if they cannot fully understand why. Across the long dinner table, my sister Eliza's children were bouncing energetically in their chairs, talking loudly over one another, interrupting every conversation, and nobody said a single word to stop them. Nobody gave them a disapproving look. Nobody asked them to settle down. But Mia sat perfectly still and perfectly silent beside me, because she had already learned, far too early in her short life, which children in this family were expected to behave, and which ones were allowed to run wild without any consequences. My sister Eliza sat directly across from me, wearing a smile that she had clearly been practicing and perfecting for a very long time. It was that particular, very specific kind of smile that says, "I am being completely reasonable," while her eyes are communicating something entirely different, something that whispers, "I am about to destroy your evening and then call it setting healthy boundaries." Her husband Connor sat loyally beside her, nodding along at absolutely nothing in particular, like the human equivalent of a computer screensaver that looks like it is doing something important, but is actually doing nothing at all. Connor had been floating around the edges of our family for years, always just a little too comfortable inside my parents' house, always treating the guest room like it had his name permanently engraved on the door. Connor was the kind of man who could stand and watch an entire building burn to the ground, and then calmly turn around and ask someone where the marshmallows were. My mother sat at her end of the table, delicately dabbing the corner of her mouth with her linen napkin, behaving as though we were seated at some grand and elegant holiday banquet, rather than in the middle of a slow-motion family disaster that had been building for years. My father stared down at his plate of mashed potatoes with the focused, desperate intensity of a man who was silently negotiating with them, begging them to somehow transform into a completely different and better life. The evening had been uncomfortable and tense from the very first moment I walked through the front door. It started with small comments, little carefully aimed digs delivered with pleasant smiles. "Oh, Rachel, you look so tired," my mother said the very second I stepped inside, in that particular tone that made fatigue sound like a serious personal failure and a character flaw rather than the natural result of raising a child alone while grieving. My sister Eliza glanced briefly at Mia's dress and said, "How cute! Very simple," in the casual, dismissive tone of someone who believed that a 7-year-old child should perhaps be dressed as though she were attending a formal state dinner rather than a family Christmas meal. Connor looked at me with a perfectly straight and serious face and asked, "So tell me, are things still financially tight for you these days?" I smiled through every single one of those comments. I did what I have always done my entire life in that house. I swallowed every sting, nodded politely, and pretended with everything I had that everything was perfectly fine and normal. Because it was Christmas. Because Mia was sitting right there watching me. Because I had made a firm promise to myself at the beginning of the month that this year was going to be genuinely different. But somewhere between the green bean casserole and Eliza's third passive-aggressive compliment about the elegance and artistry of her own holiday centerpiece, she decided she was completely done pretending that we were a normal and loving family. She set her fork down against her plate with quiet, deliberate intention, the way a judge sets down a gavel before delivering a final and irreversible verdict. "We need to have a talk," she announced. My stomach dropped instantly, not because I was shocked or surprised, but precisely because I was not. I had been expecting this moment. I knew with absolute certainty what kind of talk this was going to be. It was going to be the kind of conversation where I am not permitted to have any emotions whatsoever, and if I do happen to have them, they will immediately be labeled as dramatic, excessive, and proof of my instability. Eliza leaned back in her chair with the relaxed, practiced confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. It is just that it has been a lot, and Mom and Dad are both in agreement with me on this. My father did not look up from his plate. My mother did not protest or interject. Connor continued chewing his food very slowly, with the satisfied expression of someone who had been privately looking forward to this particular moment for quite a long time. "Eliza," I said, keeping my voice carefully, deliberately calm, "what exactly are you doing right now?" She tilted her head slightly to one side. "We have all discussed it and decided together. You should leave this house and never return." There it was, clean, precise, rehearsed to perfection, like she had spent several evenings standing in front of her bathroom mirror practicing the exact tone, the exact words, and the exact facial expression. Mia looked up from her plate of peas. My mother immediately joined in, because she could never allow Eliza to hold the spotlight completely to herself for more than a few seconds at a time. "Christmas is so much better without you," she said softly, almost gently, almost kindly, the way one might comment about preferring a different brand of scented candle. I blinked, once, twice. I looked directly at my father across the table. For one long, suspended moment, I genuinely believed he might finally say something, anything at all, even one small word of protest or discomfort. But he said nothing. He simply sat there looking exhausted, defeated, and quietly complicit in what was happening. Beneath the table, Mia's small hand tightened around her fork. I felt something shift and crack inside my chest, quietly and irreversibly, like a ceramic plate sliding off a kitchen counter in another room, the sound reaching you only after the damage is already done. In that moment, I understood with complete and sudden clarity that I had exactly two choices available to me. I could beg them to reconsider. I could explain myself, defend myself, and go through the deeply humiliating routine of trying to prove to people who should have always loved me unconditionally that I deserved to exist within my own family. I could audition, once again, for a role that should never have required an audition in the first place. Or I could stop auditioning entirely, forever. I set my fork down gently on the edge of my plate. "Mia, sweetheart," I said quietly, keeping my eyes locked on her face and nowhere else. "Can you please go and grab your coat and your little backpack? We are leaving now." She did not hesitate for even a single second. She slid off her chair smoothly and gracefully, like a child who had been quietly waiting for someone to finally give her permission to escape. "Okay," she said simply. No argument, no tears, no protest, just pure, unmistakable relief wrapped gently inside a child's small voice. She walked out of the dining room and turned down the hallway toward the coat closet, and something about the speed with which she went, something about how readily and willingly she left, made me feel genuinely sick deep inside. It told me she had been carrying the weight and discomfort of this family far longer than I had ever allowed myself to honestly acknowledge. The moment Mia disappeared around the corner of the hallway, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. Eliza crossed her arms across her chest with a satisfied, settled expression. "Good, that settles everything quite nicely, then." Connor exhaled a long, slow sigh, like a man who had just successfully resolved a minor and inconvenient scheduling conflict at work. My mother's mouth tightened into a thin, controlled line. "Rachel, please do not make this any harder than it needs to be." I looked at each of them in turn. I looked at my sister, my mother, my father, and my brother-in-law, and then something completely unexpected happened inside of me. I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly or forgiving smile. It was the kind of smile that surfaces on your face when you have spent years desperately trying to win a game, and you suddenly and clearly realize for the very first time that the game was completely rigged against you from the very beginning. "All right," I said in a perfectly calm and even voice. Eliza looked supremely smug. I stood up slowly and pushed my chair back from the table. "Then you absolutely will not mind me doing this." They all watched me carefully, waiting with visible anticipation for a breakdown. For tears, for trembling hands, for a long and passionate dramatic speech about how much they had hurt me over the years. Instead, I walked calmly into the kitchen and opened the cupboard nearest to the end of the counter. Tucked carefully behind a tall stack of holiday-serving platters, right where I had placed them earlier that afternoon, were 3 folded sheets of paper. Each one had a name written on it in thick, clear black marker. Mom. Dad. Eliza. Eliza's eyebrows lifted sharply. What is that? Connor scoffed with theatrical dismissiveness. Are those some kind of cards? My mother laughed lightly, the way she always does when she is attempting to make something appear small and unimportant before she has fully understood what it is. Rachel, what on earth are you doing? This is completely ridiculous. I looked at her steadily and calmly. Is it? My father finally spoke, his voice cautious and wary. If you are attempting to make us feel guilty about something. No, I said, my voice remaining completely steady. This is not about guilt at all. This is about consequences. I picked up the paper labeled Mom and tore it slowly, deliberately, and completely straight down the middle. The sharp sound of ripping paper cut cleanly through the silent room. My mother's practiced smile disappeared from her face entirely, and all at once. Rachel. I picked up the paper labeled Dad next. I tore it slowly, deliberately. Every inch of the tear was intentional. Then I picked up Eliza's paper and did the same. I let all 6 torn pieces fall from my hands onto the kitchen counter and flutter down like leaves. For a long, suspended moment, nobody in the room moved or spoke or breathed. Then Connor laughed, an awkward, uncertain sound that did not know what it was supposed to be. Eliza's voice sharpened like a blade. You are simply proving our point for us. My mother shook her head slowly, looking at me like she was watching a complete stranger standing in her kitchen. This is exactly why, she said, as though those 3 words constituted a complete and logical sentence. I did not argue with either of them. I did not explain myself or defend my actions or ask them to reconsider their position. I simply turned around. Mia was already standing in the hallway, fully dressed in her winter coat, her tiny backpack hanging neatly over both of her small shoulders. She looked up at me with very wide and very serious eyes, but she did not look surprised, not even slightly. I reached out and took her hand in mine. We are going, I said. And together, we walked out of the front door and into the cold night air. The cold hit my face the moment we stepped outside, that sharp, clean, biting kind of cold that startles your lungs awake and makes you suddenly and completely aware that you are breathing. As Mia and I walked down the porch steps together, I glanced back through the large front window of my parents' house. They were all still standing in the kitchen, staring down at the torn pieces of paper scattered across the counter. Then, slowly, they began picking the pieces up, first one person, then another turning them over, trying to read what was written on them, trying to understand what exactly they had just allowed to be destroyed. Their expressions changed rapidly and visibly, moving through distinct stages in quick succession. Smug satisfaction became confused uncertainty. Confused uncertainty became pale realization. Pale realization became outright panic. The front door flew wide open behind us. Rachel. Wait, please wait. Come back, you have to come back. But I did not stop walking. I did not slow down. I did not turn around. 5 minutes earlier, with complete confidence and zero hesitation, they had told me that Christmas was better without me in it. Now they were standing on the porch steps in the freezing December air, begging me to reverse something that they still could not bring themselves to name out loud, let alone apologize for directly. I helped Mia into the car, buckled her in safely, walked around to the driver's side, and drove away into the dark and quiet night without looking back even once. My sister Eliza is exactly 6 years older than me. That detail matters far more than most people initially realize or are willing to acknowledge. 6 years is the difference between being the beloved baby that the entire family adores and protects, and being the child who is expected to already know better. Already do more, already need less. From the very beginning of our lives, Eliza was the golden child, the one whose happiness the world was expected to stop and organize itself around. When Eliza cried, everything stopped and everyone came running. When I cried, I was told I was being dramatic and oversensitive. Eliza received dance lessons and art classes and every opportunity my parents could afford to offer. I was told to watch her while my mother ran errands. When Eliza did something bold or loud or difficult, people smiled and said, "She is just so passionate." When I did the same, people sighed and said, "Why can you not be more like your sister?" The holidays revealed the difference between us most painfully and most clearly. Eliza would open gift after beautifully wrapped gift while the entire family watched and celebrated her reactions. She performed gratitude perfectly every single time, and everyone applauded. I received something practical and sensible, something useful, and was then handed a large black trash bag and asked to clean up all the wrapping paper scattered across the floor. For most of my childhood and a good portion of my adult life, I genuinely believed that this was simply how families worked. I thought this was normal. I had nothing else to compare it to, and so I accepted it as truth. Until I met Daniel. Daniel was the first human being who ever looked at the way my family treated me and said, quietly but firmly and without any hesitation, "Rachel, I need you to understand something. That is not normal. None of that is normal." We married a year after we met, and Daniel turned out to be one of the most quietly extraordinary people I have ever known. He worked as a construction engineer, spending long and exhausting hours designing and building things that were meant to actually last, structures built with precision and care and integrity. And very slowly and very quietly together, we began helping my parents financially. $200 every single month, sometimes significantly more than that when an emergency arose and they needed it. We gave it willingly and consistently, and we never made them feel ashamed for needing it. They never truly thanked us for it. Then, 6 months before that Christmas dinner, Daniel died. A scaffold collapsed during a routine site inspection at a construction project he was overseeing. The investigation conducted afterward revealed clearly and conclusively that the collapse had been entirely preventable, that someone had made choices that should never have been made, and that those choices had cost my husband his life. My entire world collapsed along with that scaffold. Overnight, everything I had built and trusted and depended upon was simply gone. The financial support we had been quietly providing to my parents stopped immediately, because I could barely hold my own life together from one day to the next. I was grieving, I was terrified, I was a single mother, and I was doing everything within my power simply to survive each week. And the very first thing my family noticed, the very first thing they commented on and asked about, was not my grief. It was not Mia's grief. It was not even a question about how we were managing to survive. The first thing they noticed was the missing money. Months later, just before the Christmas holiday, the wrongful death settlement finally came through after a long and painful legal process. $2 million. The very first thought that moved through my mind when I received the news was this: perhaps this is the thing that finally fixes everything. Perhaps this is the opportunity to repair what has always been broken. And so I prepared 3 documents, the ones I tore up in my parents' kitchen that night. I had planned, with a genuinely open and hopeful heart, to give each of the 3 of them a portion of the settlement. $500,000 total, divided carefully and thoughtfully among them. Enough money to genuinely and permanently change the course of their lives. Enough to pay off debts, create security, and build something lasting. They did not receive a single dollar. Instead, I used that money to purchase a modest, comfortable, safe home for Mia and myself. I invested the remainder carefully and deliberately with the guidance of a trusted financial advisor, building a stable and secure future. A future in which my daughter would never once have to shrink herself, silence herself, or perform herself into something smaller and quieter in order to feel that she deserved to be loved. 8 months have passed since that Christmas evening. The noise has faded. The drama has faded. The phone calls and the messages and the attempts to pull me back into the gravity of that family's dysfunction have faded. What has remained, what has settled into the corners and the quiet hours of our new home, is peace. Real, steady, unperformed peace. Mia laughs more freely now than she ever did before. She sleeps soundly and deeply through the night. She moves through our home with the easy, natural confidence of a child who knows with absolute certainty that she belongs there, that her presence is not a burden to be managed, but a joy to be celebrated. And honestly, with my whole heart and without a single reservation, I do not regret the decision I made that night. Because the only thing worse than losing your family is sitting quietly beside your 7-year-old daughter and teaching her, through your own silence and endurance, that cruelty deserves a reward. So I will ask you honestly, and I genuinely want you to think carefully before you answer. Did I go too far, or not nearly far enough?